#idataengineer.
My name is Daniel. Some call me the Data Janitor, and I'm building Pipeline Data Engineering Academy, the world's first data engineering bootcamp. Not one of today's data engineers grew up as a kid imagining becoming one. I definitely didn't. That made me think about how others look at our line of work, and I feel the best way to explain it is through asking a handful of practitioners about their journey and how their work look like.
Who are you and what do you do now?
I'm Micha. I'm the lead data engineer in the forecasting team of Maersk. And if you don't know, Maersk is the biggest ocean container shipper, the biggest shipping company. And when I say containers, I'm talking about, real containers that actually ship food and stuff, right? So in my team, in the forecasting team, we are responsible for delivering forecasts to optimize the global service delivery of the company worldwide.
How did you end up as a data engineer?
I get this question a lot with my background, and I always come up with different things. So let's see what I end up this time. And of course, there's a lot of hindsight bias in trying to explain all my actions in the past, find out why I am a data engineer right now. I actually started doing undergrad in physics in Germany, and then went on to do a PhD in London at University College London within still physics, but more like biophysics, so applied biology, and doing magnetic resonance and high performance computing for simulation of proteins. So very, very specific. I really liked the power of computer and data, and I actually went on to do a postdoc. So that's the stuff you do in academia after a PhD. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be a professor, right? That's kind of what I dreamt of at the time. And for 3.5 years, I did a postdoc here in Copenhagen, and I really actually loved it. And I love to collaborate with people, and I like to get my hands dirty. So for some time, I was also not the Müllmann, but I was the guy who cared about the high field magnets actually in the basement of the research center. That is something I really realized at the time that I liked that. I like to get my hands dirty. I like to actually get things done and working and solving problems. And it wasn't so much about the professorship anymore. It was about actually solving problems. And when I realized that was also the time when my wife was pregnant with a second child. We also thought, okay, maybe I can do that in a different role. Maybe I don't have to become a professor to do these kind of problem solving and interesting things and fiddling around. And I took a job at Novo Nordisk, which is a big pharma here in Denmark. And after some time, I then switched to Maersk, where I'm now. I realized in the last couple of years that I really like working as a problem solver. And I was working as a data engineer in R&D in Novo Nordisk and now in Maersk. It was a kind of opportunity that I took, really. And I realized only afterwards that it was the right decision, where I can actually, solve problems. I love what I'm doing, but I never, as you said in the beginning, right? I never dreamt about becoming a data engineer. That was never my plan. I think when I started, there wasn't the notion of a data engineer really as kind of the hype field that it is today, right? I think that's it. I think I'm attracted by the problem solving, by the kind of complex problems you have to solve. That gets me going. That gets me up in the morning. Yes.
It's fun to hear because it might even sound like that you not even kind of grew into the role, but you were doing this already and the role kind of got defined.
Actually, you know what happened? So when I took the job at Novo Nordisk, I wasn't hired as a data engineer, right? That didn't exist in the R&D space back then. I was actually hired as a research scientist for automation and data processing. But then I became the very first scientific data engineer at Novo Nordisk. There was some realization that actually the work I was doing was data engineering work. And then I got that role.
Huh. Okay. What projects or tools or trends do excite you these days?
The very first thing that excites me is not necessarily a tool, but it's more a trend towards that it's becoming more and more accessible to actually develop data as code, to take good practices from software engineering, who have kind of a head start, I think, on us when it comes to DevOps and all the nice things that lets them scale up their solutions. We, especially in the machine learning field where I'm working in, we're getting to a better place in terms of defining what are good practices to build machine learning models and how to do reproducible things. All the things, people talk about in buzzwords, I think we are getting there, but not by using specific tools, but just by realizing what the processes should be. Another thing that excites me is that we're also seeing more and more systematic data testing. Again, especially in the ML field and like warehousing field, it's rare in my experience that you see that data pipelines and a lot of models are tested thoroughly when it comes to actually like data value testing and not just code testing. I think the development in that field, that excites me a lot. We are also using that and implemented that now in our setup. And that's something that I think is super important, and it's exciting to see that there is some traction and a lot of communities forming around those problems. The last thing that excites me is that we are moving away from just focusing on the tech tools, but actually having a conversation around what is the outcome that we want to drive with that data. There is still this, I always feel there's this fallacy of just putting all the data in some enterprise store, right? And of course, I have worked for big enterprises, so it's kind of my bias here that I'm talking about big enterprises. But there's this kind of fallacy of just putting stuff in a centralized place with a centralized team, and that will solve all the problems. And it might, right? But I think that the conversation is going more and more towards what are actually the outcomes we want to drive. So, and then we can see, for example, in our team, we are able to deliver forecasts that actually make a significant impact on the business. And it's not a tech company. We're not Google, we're not Apple, right? We're Maersk, and we're able to deliver actual value to the company by building these models and making these forecasts. And that's what really excites me, because then it becomes about outcome and impact, and not about what tool to use to do your data pipeline.
Great, it's like moving the needle, actually.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you see that the role of data engineering going to change in the next some years?
I mean, the trend right now looks like, data has like a huge potential to become more and more important. And I think in my bubble, at least, I see that we're only using part of it. And I think that's also kind of the consensus, that we are not leveraging data enough. However, what has to change, and what hopefully also change, is more that we are going away from talking about Hadoop and big data and all the names. I think that doesn't matter. I think what matters is that we move to a view where we not say data has intrinsic value, because it really doesn't, right? If you have a spreadsheet of data, it doesn't matter. It matters what you do with the data. So shifting the conversation from data and data warehousing and like to, convergence of the data lake and data warehouse, what we will see, what really makes an impact, what moves the needle, is changing the conversation from talking about what are the outcomes we can drive from data, and then solving that problem, and not building more and more tech debt by just doing the next migration and the next migration and the next migration. Right? I think that is what hopefully will change more and more, and I see that happening at least in our company, where we're trying to build an engineering culture rather than going from Azure to AWS to GCP. Yeah.
What's actionable, really?
And I think the interesting thing about this, is that when you read, for example, Kimball, the Bible for a lot of the people doing data warehousing, in the preface, he says, right, it's about solving the business problem. But then people go on and talk about how their models, slow changing dimensions, and all these things. They kind of skip the first part. They've skipped the preface of like, make sure you solve an actual problem before you go out and do all these nice things that you can do with data.
Ask the whys, like keep in mind, why are we doing this whole exercise?
Exactly.
What piece of advice would you give someone who's just starting out in data engineering?
I actually regularly give talks at the university around like what it is or how it is to work as a data engineer in industry to some master students. Sometimes they come back after the talk and they ask me, "Oh, you're telling me you're self-taught, you never did computer science. How do I do this, right? How do I learn this?" And when I go back, when I try to think how I learned it, I made all the mistakes, right? Because the time when I did it at university, we didn't have good coding practices. We were just hacking things in MATLAB or in R or in, then later Python, sometimes even C, right? Whatever we needed to do. And that's how I learned through years. I didn't do data camp or these things that are out there now. The best advice I can give, I feel, is that I would say don't just invest in vocational skills. Don't just invest in being able to write some Python code and list comprehensions and whatever you want to do there, but actually learn to listen to people who have problems and then solving hard problems, right? And that is kind of the thing you have to repeat all the time. Get a new problem, solve a new problem. On the top of that, also just make sure that you learn the ability to understand the problem well enough and then solve it fast. I mean, you have to find this balance, and I think that's a real skill to have. And I see people who have that skill, they are way more effective than people who can only program or who can only just spend too much time planning, right? I think striking that balance is something you have to learn. For me, that is a key craft of data engineers, that they can do that.
Thank you. Did you have a recent culinary experience that you like to share? Something you cooked or something you found on the street, on a random booth, I don't know.
If you're asking me about the dish that kind of has the highest standing in my memory.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's an aubergine and lemon risotto from Ottolenghi. It's a super nice dish. It's a vegetarian super nice dish, and it has a special place in my heart because it's one of the dishes that I make that my wife really loves. She's vegetarian, and we've been to Ottolenghi, one of the restaurants in London, and she completely hated the experience. But we love the food, so we have like all the cookbooks, and we do a lot of cooking from that. And she always asks me to make that dish when special friends are over.
This is the dish.
This is the dish, yes. It's our risotto dish that we make. It's very good.
Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to share your insights. Thank you.
If you are a data engineer and you feel like sharing your story, reach out. I'd be happy to chat with you.
#IDataEngineer